welcome to EWTN Bookmark, a remote one coming from Rome, where our guest is author, Most Reverend Father Joseph Roesch, Vicar General, Marians of the Immaculate Conception. And the book is France, A Pilgrimage with Mary, published by Marian Press, available through our EWTN religious catalog. So, Father, you've had a series of books now you've put together. You had one on Fatima, and then one on Rome, and now one on France. So I'm assuming these style books are proving very popular.
Well, they really are. People at home who don't have a chance to make an international pilgrimage can vicariously go on the trip by seeing the beautiful pictures and reading the story of the apparitions. And I also like to make it personal. I talk about our personal experience of what it's like to go there so they can go along with us and walk along in the path with Mary. So Mary wants to evangelize her children, and I think these books are a great way to do that.
Well, you mentioned that the book tells the story of pilgrimage with Our Lady to several of her shrines, and you mentioned how you felt like Our Lady was with you every step of the way. How do you feel that?
Well, I tell the story in this book on France how when I was a young guy, I had first gone to a Miraculous Medal novena when I was very young, and I came to know those prayers. And then I flew from Rome to Paris. I met the team there, and the next thing you know, we're at the tomb of St. Vincent de Paul, and the next thing you know, we're at this chapel of the Miraculous Medal, and everything was familiar to me, these prayers from my youth of the Miraculous Medal novena, and everything that I had learned when I was growing up. And so it just seems like Our Lady is just walking us through. Then we went to another place in Paris, Our Lady of Victories, and I saw how the French Revolution had done such a terrible destruction on the church in France and on the faith. But then Our Lady, through her apparitions and through these shrines, finds a way of bringing the faith back. And it's just astonishing to see the graces that come with the Miraculous Medal, or the graces that go with those kind of shrines.
Right, Miraculous Medal was the first thing that I remember having as a kid as well. And you talk about, I guess it was growing up in Staten Island right now. You said that you in a sense were an altar server before you were an altar server. How'd you work that one out?
That's right. I kind of forced my way in there. I asked if I could get trained. I was in the 3rd grade. They said, well, we don't train until the 5th grade. And I said, oh my goodness, how am I going to wait for 2 years? So my parents were going to daily mass that summer, and so I came along, sat in the first row, and I would intensely watch the priest and the servers and study their every move to figure out what to do. And then when the sister asked if there was no server that day, she says, would you like to serve? I said, I'm ready. I ran right in there, put on my cassock and surplice, and I was ready to go.
Right. Do you have trouble finding the sink anymore, or are you good now?
That's right. In that little church where we were, the sink was behind the door, so that's the only thing that I couldn't learn from the pew where everything was in the sacristy. But step by step, I came to learn where things were.
Did you overdose on incense when you were first doing it?
Well, that was another story that I tell, that on the Monday night novenas, they would have incense, and I never understood why servers would swing the incense boat back and forth, the thurifer. But then I realized it's so all the smoke won't go right into your face. And the first time that I tried it without any training, that's exactly what happened. All the smoke was overwhelming me. And I thought, boy, this is difficult. Right. But eventually I learned you have to do that move to keep the smoke away.
Right, and there's great stories in here, and there's beautiful photography, obviously, and images of you in the settings as well. And the two people involved are Mary Clark and Melanie Williams. What did each of them contribute to the book?
Well, Mary created the whole project. She figured out where we were supposed to go, the sites and the order, and she made all our reservations, and she set everything up for us. And then Melanie was the photographer and the videographer. We also made some YouTube videos to go along with the book and the publishing of the book. And she also kept us from getting lost on the roads in France, because we went in the summer of 2018 when there was a train strike. So we were originally thinking of going from place to place by train, but we were afraid to get stuck somewhere and not be able to go forth. So we rented a car, and she always was able to get us out of traffic jams with her apps and figure out where to go next. So
well, you're in France because there's a strike It's one of the ways you knew you were actually there.
That's right. Always a strike going on.
Always a strike going on someplace. Now, you talked about this, a Marian apparition, Our Lady appeared to a vineyard worker. What was that one? That was kind of unfamiliar to me.
Well, we were, again, it was in the southern part of France. It was a very small diocesan shrine, pretty unknown beyond even that region of France, I think. But it was an approved apparition in that diocese, and it was a man who worked in someone else's vineyard during the week, so he only had a chance to work in his vineyard on Sundays. So he was working on Sundays and not observing the Lord's Day. And so Our Lady appeared to him. He was a 30-year-old guy, married with children, a very simple man. And Our Lady said to him, "You have the malady of the vine." In other words, you're addicted to working and working in the vineyard, and you're not observing the Lord's Day. And he was just one of many people there who were taking their faith, not taking their faith seriously, making fun of the faith, and not observing the Lord's Day. So Our Lady appeared to him twice, 1 month apart, and the call was to observe the Lord's Day. She ended up calling him to make some processions to some nearby churches and shrines, and praying and observing the Lord's Day, and really doing what we're supposed to do on Sundays. And his whole life was completely changed after that. He didn't work on Sundays. He never became rich, but he was happy, and he was able to take care of his family for the rest of his life. So I think it's a message for each one of us to observe the Lord's Day.
Right, a beautiful, simple lesson, really, that's not really hard to implement in your life, right? So you went to Rue de Bac, and I thought this was interesting. You mentioned the fact about the chapel filled complete with faithful for the weekday Mass. Many in attendance were immigrants from Africa who now live in Paris. Were you surprised to see so many immigrants? And was that in some ways a very
I really was.
positive
I really was.
thing to see?
I walked into that chapel. I was in the sacristy and I concelebrated, and we walked out, and I thought I was in Africa just to look at the congregation. And the faith and the fervor of the people was very striking. And then I helped give out communion, and they just kept coming and coming. And there's the chapel below, and then there's a balcony surrounding the chapel, and they came down for communion. So it was really very striking just to see the faith, because you hear about secular France and you know what's going on in that country, but just to see the faith there. And then later on that day, we went to this beautiful Montmartre, which is the shrine with some early martyrs, Saint. I forget his name, but there were some very early martyrs in France, and there was Eucharistic adoration going on there. The church was filled, the sisters were singing, and so it was just a beautiful experience for us just to see the faith that is going on in Paris and in the different parts of France.
Right, and you talk about the apparitions, and there's pictures here of the location itself. You talk about Our Lady predicted the request of Mother Seton's community in Emmitsburg, Maryland, to be united with the Daughters of Charity in France. Our Lady foretold peace and growth for St. Catherine's community, and she urged St. Catherine to not be discouraged, but to have confidence despite all the troubles that would come. So how did she predict that? And isn't there a connection to your youth, because weren't you taught by those sisters?
I was taught by those very sisters, and there was that connection with the Vincentians and the Daughters of Charity and the Sisters of Charity of Mother Seton's community. Actually, Mother Seton's parents are actually buried on Staten Island, and she used to help her father with the immigrants that would come who had to be quarantined. She helped with them. And then I had a chance to visit Emmitsburg, Maryland as well, where the sisters were from. So the apparition of the Miraculous Medal took place in 1830, which was about 30 years after the French Revolution. Again, it devastated the church, and there was all kinds of repercussions, including laxity that came into the Vincentians and into the sisters as well, those Daughters of Charity. But Our Lady predicted that there would be a revival and a reflourishing of those communities, and that they would be able to overcome all those difficulties that happened there.
Right. Interesting. You say originally called the Medal of the Immaculate Conception, it quickly became known as the Miraculous Medal. I had not heard that. So you also have an image of...
Yeah, I mean, on the outside of the medal is, O Mary, conceived without sin, pray for us who have recourse to thee. And that medal was before the dogma, which was proclaimed in 1854.
Right. And then you have an image of St. Catherine Labouré. You go on to the Basilica of Victories. What is the Basilica of Victories?
Our Lady of Victories, well, there was a pastor of the local church where our St. Catherine was having his apparitions, and he said to her spiritual director, why don't you let the faithful come to this chapel, because now the Miraculous Medal was becoming very well known. But he didn't want to interrupt the prayers of the sisters, so this spiritual director of St. Catherine was very, very cautious. He took him a long time to finally go for the Miraculous Medal, because he figured, how can Our Lady be appearing to a mere novice? So this pastor then was transferred to another church. Now that church, Our Lady of Victories, had a long history. There had been a great Marian devotion there before the French Revolution. During the Revolution, it became the stock market. It was desecrated. There was all kinds of awful things happening in that church. And then after the Revolution, a couple years after the apparition to St. Catherine, this pastor was trying everything he could to bring the faith back to the people, to revive them, to get them to come to church again. And he would have a handful of people coming, and everything he tried was just not working. So for about 5 years, he was ready to give up. And then he was saying Mass one day, and he got a thought that he should consecrate the parish to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. And he felt peace in his heart when he heard this. But then he wasn't sure when Mass was over. I'm not sure if I was just dreaming that. But he got a kind of a confirmation. He prayed for the conversion of a famous politician there, and he was converted very quickly. So what he did was he started a confraternity of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. He announced it in the parish. There were 12 people in the church that Sunday. He says, we're going to start this night, Sunday night. I hope maybe 50 people might come. 500 people came that night, and mostly were men, which was amazing. And it's just been going ever since. And now this confraternity of the Immaculate Heart of Mary, which the purpose is to pray for the conversion of sinners, has cenacles and confraternities all over the world. It's still bearing fruit. Many saints have visited that church. Saint Therese of Lisieux was cured through her father praying for through the intercession of the Our Lady of Victories. So there's a lot of beautiful connections with that church. It's very nice, worth visiting in Paris if people go.
Right. Now, you visited Notre Dame, and you mentioned the fact that the cathedral sustained a great deal of damage during the French Revolution, was reconstructed afterwards. Now, it obviously sustained some serious damage recently because of the fire.
Yep.
Were you there before the fire?
We were there before that. So we were there in June of in 2018, and then it was about 8 or 10 months later that the terrible fire happened, and so it was devastating to see that. But it's miraculous that it didn't collapse completely, and that there's still so much there that can be saved. And I said, let's pray for the reconstruction of that beautiful cathedral, because it's right in the heart of Paris. It's on this island of the city in the middle of the Seine River. And so all of the mileage for the distances from Paris for all the other cities are going right from there. So it's literally the center of the city, literally the heart of the city. And it's so important. So we pray that the cathedral can be revived, because it is such a beautiful cathedral dedicated to Our Lady, Notre Dame, meaning Our Lady. And the sunlight coming into those beautiful stained glass windows, it just shows how God's grace can continue to transform our lives.
Did it strike you at all, the connection when you heard about the fire, kind of thinking back on the French Revolution and the desecration of what happened, and having this fire happen again, that, in the sense of our need to rebuild?
Oh, absolutely. At the end of the book, I talk about that book of Revelation and the woman clothed with the sun and that battle with the dragon. It seems that it's a constant battle. The evil one always wants to tear down anything connected with Our Lady. But Our Lady, of course, her Immaculate Heart will triumph in the end, as we know. And so we have to continue to pray. This battle is going on. It's raging today. But it was just powerful. There was the crucifix and an image of Our Lady, I think, was not destroyed, and they continued to stand. So that was a sign of the Paschal mystery of Christ. Jesus' death on the cross, that's going to be our salvation, and it can't be overturned.
Right. Now, when you went to Lourdes, you have a title here called A Fairytale Location. What did you mean by that?
Well, I have been to Fatima many times, and I had never been to Lourdes. I always wanted to go to Lourdes. I finally got there that summer in preparation for the book. And so I had heard, oh, Lourdes is very commercial. There's all kinds of gift shops everywhere, and so I just had a kind of a negative connotation as I was coming in. And so maybe I had low expectations, but it's just a gorgeous place. There's hills in the background. There's a beautiful river that runs through the city. There's a castle there. It really looks like you're in a fairy tale or a fable from the Middle Ages. It's just a breathtaking place. And I was able to climb a hill just near the shrine for the Stations of the Cross and to see the view. And then the river runs through, and then there's the grotto next to the river. So it was more beautiful than I had realized.
Right, and you got
to believe beforehand.
Right, and you got to say Mass at the grotto. I know there's a picture in the book which features that as well. What was that
like? It was a
like?
wonderful experience, yeah, and to give out communion to the sick, and to see how they take care of the sick there. It's just it's just beautiful. They just have so many volunteers there, and so many wonderful ways of taking care of the sick, and the sick are brought to the forefront, so it's really it's very striking.
Right. You also say we were able to visit the church where St. Bernadette had been baptized, the Bowley Mill where she had been born, the dungeon room where she and her family had lived at the time of the apparitions. It was a dank former jail that had been all the family could afford. At the time, there's also a picture of you standing outside the residence where Bernadette would go to see the priest right after each apparition. What was it like to see that dungeon room?
Well, it's a very sad story of the family, how they were very faithful. They were illiterate, all of them, the parents and Bernadette, and they just, circumstances were playing against them. He was accused of some kind of thievery or something, of some wood when he was trying to take care of his family. And so their circumstances were just going from bad to worse. They went from a very nice circumstances of a mill. He was a miller, producing the flour. Then they went to a place that was poorer than they had, and then they ended up in this dungeon type situation, which was really horrible and dank, and it was a very difficult situation. And so then they were going to be accused that when these apparitions started taking place, and that everybody wanted to see Bernadette, that they're going to take advantage of this and try to get money for people who would want to give donations and things like that. But they refused, absolutely refused to take anything, despite their difficult circumstances. And then the parish priest was a very difficult man. He was not open to the apparitions at first, and he eventually became a great believer and helped to build the beautiful shrine that exists there today, the church. But so when she had to go to him and knock on the door and make her requests as per what Our Lady would ask her to do, it was not easy for her, because she was a little simple girl, uneducated. But she knew she had to do it, and she would go up to that door and knock and talk to the priest. And people were just converted by her demeanor, her style. She was such a simple, humble girl. And it was obvious that she was not creating this, because she couldn't. She was so simple.
Our Lady of, I know it's Laos, 17th, 18th century, Our Lady appeared over the course of 54 years. I didn't realize that we had an apparition that ran that long.
That's right. I had never heard of this before either. That was in the foothills of the Alps, not far from La Salette. I had never heard of it. There was a simple shepherdess, another uneducated girl, who began having apparitions when she was just 17 years old, and they continued for over 50 years throughout her life. And that shrine is a refuge of sinners. It's a place for conversions. The purpose of that shrine is for people to go to confession and to confess their sins and to be converted. And this shepherdess, her name was Benoit, she had a gift of reading souls and being able to see what people needed to confess. And so I think it was similar to what the Curé of Ars had and what Padre Pio had, being able to read souls. But they were both priests. But she was just a simple, uneducated girl. And so what she would do is she would help people to do an examination of conscience before going to confession. And she would help them and guide them and say, no, don't forget that sin. You have to get that one in too, because God gave her that grace. And she also sometimes had to tell that to priests as well. But she would direct people in the right direction. She received many graces throughout her life and suffered a great deal. She was like a victim soul,
right,
because obviously the evil one was not happy with all
right,
these conversions that were coming out of that place. But it was a very, very touching place, a beautiful spot in the mountains, in the Alps. Again, beautiful
right,
setting. And also they send the oil from the oil lamp, from the sanctuary lamp, all over the place. And when people pray with that oil with faith, many times there are healings.
There's
that come from
healings
that. So it was a
came
really
from there, right?
beautiful spot. If anybody gets a chance to go, I'd really
Right.
recommend it.
Yeah, you highly recommend it. You mentioned the fact that you really felt Our Lady's presence there, and you also say a lovely fragrance in the sanctuary lingers from when Our Lady appeared to her. Did you notice that?
I didn't notice it myself, but they say that that frequently that is something that people experience there, so they don't put any flowers in the sanctuary, so there could be no mistake that people would say, oh, it's just coming from the flowers, but they never put the flowers there, and that fragrance doesn't always come, but apparently it very frequently comes, so that's why they don't put the flowers, so that sometimes people can experience that odor.
You also went to La Salette, when there's beautiful pictures from La Salette. There's one of you I know standing next to a cross, and of course, this is the Mother of Sorrows. She seemed, in some ways, it seems like this apparition kind of got pushed into the background for a while. Why'd you decide to go there?
Well, it's just a stunningly beautiful place, 6,000 feet above sea level in the Alps. Everywhere you look, there's a beautiful view. Our Lady appeared to two small children. I think it was in 1846. And again, that was our sorrowful mother, Our Lady of Sorrows. And again, it was people not observing Sundays, people cursing and blaspheming and taking God's name in vain, and not being honest in their dealings. So again, it's a call to conversion to the simple peasants who were living in that part of the world. Our Lady, it was very interesting. She spoke to these two children, sometimes in French and sometimes in their local dialect, because the children spoke both, but they were very simple children, sort of illiterate as well, so they didn't understand everything Our Lady was saying. And so she would switch the dialect for them, because it seemed like some of this message was for the whole world and some of it was directed just toward the people of that particular region. But again, it was a call to conversion, that heaven is concerned for us, that they're never going to abandon us, and that we need to continue to open our hearts and turn our lives around.
Well, it seems like, as it's Melanie and Maximum's, there's been some issues with their lives, and you mentioned the fact it's not surprising these visionaries had difficult lives, considering the family backgrounds and their lack of formation. The apparitions of La Salette cannot be judged by the lives of the visionaries, but by the fruits of the message. What fruit have you seen?
Well, just to tell a little bit about them, they, had no preparation for that apparition. It just happened on the one day, and then that was it. There was only one day apparition, and never any more after that. They lost their parents and other siblings. One of them was taken advantage of by people wanting to use his name and his fame. Melanie, she ended up going into different religious communities, but it never quite worked out. But I think the fruit is that a religious community came out of this apparition. They are a community of Our Lady of La Salette, and they're all over the world now evangelizing. Originally, they were diocesan priests from that diocese who were at that shrine to promote it, and then they eventually formed into a religious community, and they're preaching that message of Our Lady of La Salette has borne fruit all over the world through vocations and conversions and the good apostolic and pastoral work they do. There's a very interesting image there of the cross with the pincers and the hammer. And the hammer was used, of course, to nail Jesus' nails in the cross, and the pincers is what are used to remove the nails. And so I think part of the message of Our Lady of La Salette is what is going to be our role? Are we going to be hammering the nails into Christ's flesh once again because of our sin, or are we going to, through our conversion, be the ones who can make reparation and bring comfort to his heart by removing those nails through our conversion?
Right. So this book on France, A Pilgrimage with Mary, third book in a series. I'm assuming you're thinking about a fourth book. Any particular insights you could give us?
Well, we've looked at possibly Ireland and England, Knock and Our Lady of Walsingham, or Poland. There's many shrines of Our Lady in Poland. So we don't have anything definitely figured out, but we're moving in those directions.
When you do, stop in again, of course. These are beautiful books. Thank you so much for joining us from Rome, Most Reverend Father Joseph Roesch. He's the Vicar General Marians of the Immaculate Conception, a good friend of the network for many, many years, thanks to our Stockbridge events. The book is France, a Pilgrimage with Mary, available through our EWTN religious catalog. EWTNRC.com is the place to pick it up. Join us next time on Bookmark. Thanks.